My name is Rebecca Mitchell, 34, a forensic accountant with my own consulting firm in Boston. Last year, I received the Emerging Financial Investigator Award from the American Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, not that anyone in my personal life seemed to care. Ironic, isn't it? I spend my days following money trails and uncovering financial deceptions for others, yet I completely missed what was happening in my own home. When I married David 8 years ago, I thought I'd finally found someone who valued my analytical mind, who saw beyond the awkward, numbers-obsessed girl my family always dismissed as too intense and not social enough. My parents, especially my mother, never understood why I couldn't just be normal like my sister Jen, the pediatric nurse with the perfect suburban home in Connecticut, 3 beautiful children, and a husband who coaches Little League on weekends. My family's Thanksgiving dinners were exercises in subtle humiliation, with questions like, still working with those boring spreadsheets, and when are you going to settle down and give your poor husband some children? They never seemed to grasp that my work was my passion, not just a job. David was different, or so I thought. He respected my career, celebrated my promotions, and never pressured me about having children before I was ready. We built what I believed was a partnership of equals, a modern American marriage where both careers mattered. I handled our joint finances, again, ironic given what I discovered, and we were saving for a house in Cambridge, with a dedicated office space where I could build my business. That's what I believed, anyway, until 3 months ago, when a routine tax audit revealed a series of transfers from our joint savings account to an unknown recipient. Have you ever had that moment when something feels off, but you can't quite place it? Like when you walk into your home and somehow know someone's been there, even though nothing obvious is missing. That's how I felt when I noticed those transfers, $87,000 over 18 months, disappearing in increments just small enough that I might not notice amid our busy lives. But what I found in David's fireproof safe in our basement storage room didn't just confirm my suspicions, it shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage and forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding my entire life. I often wonder how many of us build our lives around relationships that are fundamentally dishonest. How many of us accept subtle dismissals and small betrayals until they compound into something that can no longer be ignored? And most importantly, when do we finally decide that we deserve better? From the outside, my family embodied the quintessential New England success story. My father, Richard, a third-generation lawyer at one of Boston's oldest firms, specialized in corporate litigation. My mother, Elizabeth, served on the boards of several prestigious charities and orchestrated annual fundraisers that made the society pages of the Boston Globe. We lived in a historic colonial home in Wellesley with manicured gardens that were featured twice in Architectural Digest. Every summer was spent at our Cape Cod beach house, where Mom hosted dinner parties for Dad's colleagues and potential clients. Christmas cards showcased our perfect family, Dad in his Brooks Brothers suit, Mom in pearls, my sister Jennifer looking radiant, and me, usually slightly out of place, my smile a bit too forced, my posture too stiff in whatever dress Mom had insisted would finally make me look presentable. Inside those picture-perfect walls, however, was a different story. My father ruled our home with exacting standards and cold disapproval. Nothing was ever good enough, not your grades, not your appearance, not your achievements. While he verbally eviscerated anyone who failed to meet his expectations, his true weapon was his silence. He could go days without acknowledging your existence if you disappointed him. I once won second place in a statewide mathematics competition in high school, and he didn't speak to me for 3 days because, as he finally said over Sunday dinner, Mitchells aren't runners-up. What makes it complicated is that Dad wasn't a monster, he was capable of tremendous generosity and could be charming when he wanted to be. He paid for both my undergraduate and graduate degrees without complaint. He would sometimes surprise Mom with extravagant gifts. But his approval was always conditional, always precarious. My mother, in her way, was equally damaging. Where Dad was cold, Mom was smothering. She micromanaged every aspect of our lives that might reflect on the family's image. My clothes, my hair, my friends, my hobbies, nothing was beyond her scrutiny or helpful suggestions. When I showed aptitude for mathematics rather than her preferred activities like tennis or piano, she treated it as a personal affront. "Math is for accountants and teachers, darling, not for Mitchell women," she would say with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. My sister Jennifer learned early on to play her role perfectly. She joined the right clubs, dated the right boys, chose a feminine career in nursing that mom approved of, and married a man from a good family that dad's firm had represented for years. When I was 12, I spent months working on a complex algorithm for my school's science fair. I stayed up late every night, filling notebooks with equations and code, teaching myself programming languages beyond what they taught in school. My teacher was so impressed she called my parents to tell them I had extraordinary talent. The night before the fair, I overheard Mom telling Dad in hushed tones that they needed to manage my expectations about this computer phase. The next morning, I found my project materials rearranged, crucial components missing. When I panicked, Mom calmly suggested that perhaps I wasn't as prepared as I thought and shouldn't participate rather than embarrass myself. Years later, my sister confessed that Mom had deliberately sabotaged my project, fearing that winning would only encourage my unfeminine interests. I still participated and won second place with my incomplete project. Dad's only comment was that partial work deserves partial recognition. During my junior year of college, I was offered a prestigious summer internship at a major accounting firm in New York. It would mean missing our annual family vacation to Martha's Vineyard and the series of social events Mom had already RSVP'd for on my behalf. When I announced my intention to accept the internship at Sunday dinner, Dad set down his fork and said, "Family obligations come first, Rebecca. Always." Mom added, "Darling, these connections are crucial for your future. Anyone can crunch numbers in some dreary office." I took the internship anyway. When I returned in the fall, I discovered they had redecorated my bedroom into a guest room, moving my belongings to the attic. "Since you're making independent choices now," Mom explained with her glacial smile, "we assumed you'd prefer independent living arrangements when you visit." Last Christmas, after receiving my industry award, I made one final attempt to gain my parents' recognition. I spent nearly $12,000 on a first edition copy of my father's favorite book, a rare legal text from 1842 that he had often mentioned wanting for his office collection. I researched for months, working with rare book dealers across the country to find it. When he opened it at our family gift exchange, he glanced at it briefly, said, "Interesting," and set it aside to admire the golf clubs my brother-in-law had given him. Later that evening, I found the book on a side table. Forgotten. When I asked him about it the next day, he said, "It's a nice gesture, Rebecca, but I was hoping for the 1836 edition, which contains the original foreword. Perhaps you could have consulted me before making such a purchase." The book now sits on my own shelf, a $12,000 reminder that nothing I do will ever be exactly right. The catalyst for everything that followed came from an unexpected source. 3 months before discovering David's transfers, I received a call from a law firm representing the estate of Eleanor Mitchell, my paternal grandmother who died when I was just a baby. The lawyer explained that a trust had been established for me, set to transfer upon my 35th birthday or in the event of financial necessity as determined by the trustee. The current trustee, my father's younger brother whom I rarely saw, had suffered a stroke, and during the legal reassessment of his responsibilities, they discovered that the trust's existence had never been disclosed to me as stipulated in its terms. While reviewing the paperwork in the lawyer's office, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from my grandmother, written shortly before her death, along with several faded photographs and a small key. The letter spoke of her pride in my early mathematical abilities. I was only 4 when she died, but apparently already showing aptitude, her own thwarted academic ambitions, and her hope that the trust would allow me to pursue my talents free from Richard's controlling nature. She wrote about a separate lockbox she had left for me containing truths about our family that Richard would prefer remained buried. The key, I would later discover, opened a safe deposit box at a bank in downtown Boston, a box I had yet to access when I stumbled upon David's betrayal. The Mitchell Family Foundation annual gala was approaching, a black tie fundraiser at the Four Seasons Boston that my mother had chaired for 15 years. The event raised money for educational scholarships, though the evening was more about social positioning than philanthropy. Boston's elite would gather to see and be seen, with tables costing $10,000 each and silent auction items starting at triple that amount. This year was special. My father was being honored for his 30 years of service on the foundation's board with a Lifetime Achievement Award. The invitation, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, had arrived with a handwritten note from my mother. "We expect you and David to attend. Table 1, as always. Do wear something appropriate. Neiman's has some lovely options. And please, for once, try to mingle properly." I had already purchased my dress, a conservative but elegant black Armani that I knew would meet with minimal criticism, when I discovered the first suspicious transfer from our joint account to an unknown recipient. The morning of the gala, after 2 sleepless weeks of tracking financial trails and fighting the rising panic in my chest, I finally confronted David about the money. He was in our walk-in closet, adjusting his bow tie, the perfect picture of East Coast old money in his tailored tuxedo, though his family was decidedly middle class from Pennsylvania. "It's a work expense," he said without turning around. "A client investment opportunity that came up suddenly. I was going to tell you once it paid off." His tone was dismissive, almost bored, as if I was overreacting to something trivial. "Which client?" I asked. "Which investment?" He sighed, finally turning to face me. "You wouldn't understand the specifics, Becca. It's complicated real estate development stuff." I, who analyzed complex financial structures for a living, wouldn't understand. Something in his expression, not guilt, but annoyance at being questioned, made my stomach knot. "I need documentation, David. For the audit." His jaw tightened. "I'll handle it next week. Now isn't the time to discuss this, we're already running late, and you know how your mother gets." As he brushed past me, I felt something shift inside me, the first foundation stone of our marriage cracking beneath my feet. When we arrived at the Four Seasons, my sister Jennifer immediately pulled me into an embrace that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and performative affection. "You look nice," she said, her eyes critically scanning my dress. I was worried when Mom said you were wearing black again, but at least it fits well this time. Her husband Greg clapped David on the shoulder and immediately launched into a story about his latest golf game. My nephew and nieces, perfectly groomed in miniature formal wear, were being photographed with my parents by a professional photographer for the event. "Mom was asking for you," Jen said, checking her diamond watch. "She wants family photos before the major donors arrive." I noticed she didn't say us. In the Mitchell family vernacular, I wasn't included in the definition of family unless specifically needed for appearances. Throughout the cocktail hour, I observed my family with new clarity. My father worked the room with practiced charm, his hand perpetually resting on the shoulder or elbow of whoever he was speaking with, a gesture of both dominance and false intimacy. My mother fluttered from group to group, her laughter just a touch too loud, her eyes constantly scanning for anyone more important who might deserve her attention. Jennifer and her husband performed their roles perfectly, the successful doctor and his supportive, charity-minded wife. And David, my David, who I thought stood apart from this world, moved among my parents' friends with surprising ease, discussing stock options and vacation properties as if he'd been born to this privilege. Only my Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother who had recently had a stroke, sat quietly in a corner, looking uncomfortable in his wheelchair. I made my way to him, ignoring my mother's pointed glance toward a group of potential clients she clearly wanted me to impress. "They're exhausting, aren't they?" Uncle Thomas said as I sat beside him, his words slightly slurred from his stroke. "Always performing. Always calculating." I was surprised by his candor. The Mitchell family rarely acknowledged the artifice that governed our interactions. "Your grandmother would have hated this circus," he continued, gesturing vaguely at the glittering crowd. "Eleanor believed wealth came with responsibility, not entitlement. Richard never understood that." He patted my hand with fingers gnarled by arthritis. "You remind me of her, the way your mind works. She was brilliant with numbers. too, you know. Could have been a mathematician if women in her generation had been allowed such things. I wanted to ask him about the trust, about the lockbox my grandmother had mentioned, but my mother materialized beside us, her smile strained. Rebecca, darling, the Whitmores have been asking about you. Their son just made partner at Goldman Sachs. She barely acknowledged Uncle Thomas as she practically pulled me from my chair. Thomas, you should rest if you're feeling tired. We've set up a quiet room down the hall. As she steered me toward a couple in their 60s, she whispered, for heaven's sake, Rebecca, network with people who matter. Thomas is hardly in a position to advance your career now. The casual cruelty of her dismissal of a family member recently disabled by a serious health event struck me with fresh horror. When we reached the Whitmores, she introduced me not as a successful business owner but as our Rebecca, who does something with accounting software. Her husband David is the real estate developer over there, such a dynamic young man. The dinner service began with a video tribute to my father's philanthropy. The production highlighted his cases representing educational institutions, carefully omitting his more lucrative work defending corporations against discrimination lawsuits. I watched David during the video, noticed how he leaned toward my father with admiring attention, how he nodded at all the right moments. When had my husband become one of them? Or had he always been, and I simply hadn't wanted to see it? The memory of his dismissive response about the missing money echoed in my mind, you wouldn't understand. Between the salad and main course, my mother tapped her crystal glass to quiet the room. Before Richard's official recognition, she announced, I'd like to acknowledge our wonderful family who has supported the Foundation's mission through the years. She proceeded to praise Jennifer's committee work, her husband's generous donations, even their children's participation in the Foundation's youth programs. When she turned to me, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. And Rebecca has attended our events faithfully. We're always grateful for her presence. The deliberate omission of any actual contribution hung in the air like a slap. David, seated beside me, didn't even seem to notice the slight. Instead, he was checking his phone under the table, a slight smile playing at his lips as he read something on the screen. The moment that shattered everything came during my father's acceptance speech. Standing at the podium, commanding the room with his practiced courtroom presence, he spoke about legacy and family values. Everything I've accomplished, he said, gesturing toward our table, has been possible because of the support of my family. My wife Elizabeth, whose grace and intelligence have guided our home and this foundation. My daughter Jennifer, who embodies the compassion and dedication to service that we've always valued in the Mitchell family. He paused, looking directly at my sister, who dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. And her husband, Greg, who has become the son I never had, taking up the mantle of our family's commitment to excellence. The words hit me like physical blows. Not only had I been erased entirely from his speech, but he had publicly declared another man to be the son he never had, as if my existence was so inadequate that it created a vacancy in his life. As applause filled the room, I felt something break inside me, not my heart, but the chains of expectation and approval-seeking that had bound me my entire life. My hand moved to my clutch purse, where I had placed the key to my grandmother's safe deposit box and a copy of one document I had already retrieved, her original will and trust agreement. I had visited the bank the previous day, after my confrontation with David about the missing money, looking for financial records that might help me understand my grandmother's estate. What I found instead was a comprehensive archive of family secrets, medical records, private correspondence, financial statements spanning decades. I hadn't had time to fully process everything, but one truth had emerged clearly. My father had systematically manipulated my grandmother's estate, diverting funds meant for my education and independence into his own investments and Jennifer's trust fund. The document in my purse was proof of his fraud, showing the original allocations and his subsequent alterations after becoming executor upon her death. David leaned over, his hand possessively on my knee. Your mother wants us to mingle with the Aldrich group after the speech, he whispered. Their daughter is looking for a financial advisor for their family foundation. His fingers tightened slightly. Try to sound more mainstream, less forensic. They're traditional people. The patronizing instruction, as if I needed coaching on professional interaction, combined with the fresh wound of my father's speech and the weight of the document in my purse, crystallized my decision. I stood up as my father returned to our table amid congratulatory handshakes. The room was transitioning to the dessert service, with waitstaff circulating and conversation resuming. It was the perfect moment, public enough to prevent them from silencing me, informal enough that I could speak without seeming to hijack the event. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, loud enough that the tables nearby quieted. My mother's face immediately tensed, her eyes widening in alarm at this unplanned deviation from her carefully orchestrated evening. I lifted my champagne glass. To my father, Richard Mitchell, whose lifetime of achievement extends far beyond what we're celebrating tonight. My voice was steady, amplified by the strange calm that had settled over me. In fact, I've recently discovered some of his most impressive work, his creative approach to estate management after my grandmother's death. I removed the document from my purse and unfolded it. This is Eleanor Mitchell's original trust agreement, designating equal shares of her estate to both her grandchildren, with specific provisions for my education and financial independence. And this, I said, producing a second paper, is the amended version that appeared after her death, with my portion reduced by 80% and redirected to family management fees. The silence that descended on our table was absolute. My father's face had gone rigid, while my mother's complexion drained to the color of her pearls. Jennifer looked confused, but David's expression was what truly stunned me. Not shock or disbelief, but calculation, as if he was quickly assessing how this revelation might affect him personally. "What's most interesting," I continued, aware that nearby tables were now listening intently, "is that this discovery came about because I was searching for answers about $87,000 that has disappeared from my joint account with my husband over the past 18 months. I turned to look directly at David. "Money transferred to an account belonging to Melissa Harrington, your ex-girlfriend who, according to these text messages I found in your desk," I held up a printed sheet, "is neither an ex nor just a friend, and is apparently expecting your child in August." The gasp that went through our immediate vicinity was audible. David's face contorted with fury as he grabbed for the papers in my hand, but I stepped back, out of his reach. "Rebecca, you're making a scene," my mother hissed, her smile frozen on her face as she glanced around at the watching crowd. My father stood, attempting to take control of the situation. "My daughter is clearly unwell," he announced, in his authoritative courtroom voice. "Too much champagne, perhaps." He reached for my elbow, but I pulled away. "I've never been more clear-headed," I replied, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And I'm no longer accepting your version of reality, any of you." I turned to the wider table. "For anyone interested in the truth, I have copies of all documents, including the forensic accounting trail showing exactly how my grandmother's estate was manipulated and how my husband has been funding his second life with my money." I picked up my grandmother's worn leather journal that I had also brought from the safe deposit box. "I'm taking this and the rest of my grandmother's personal effects, the ones that were meant for me. Consider it a small down payment on what was stolen." Looking at my family's shocked faces, I added, "Don't worry, I won't be pressing charges, yet. I'm sure you'll all prefer to handle this privately, given your concern for appearances." I turned to leave, then paused, looking back at my father. "Oh, and Dad. I'm not actually an accountant who does something with software. I own a forensic financial investigation firm that specializes in uncovering fraud and financial crimes. Just thought you should know exactly who you've been underestimating all these years." As I walked away from the table, through the maze of Boston's elite with their shocked expressions and hastily whispered comments, I felt a strange lightness. Behind me, I could hear my mother's attempts at damage control, just a family misunderstanding, and David's angry voice demanding that I come back immediately. My father remained ominously silent. At the coat check, I heard rapid footsteps behind me and turned to find my Uncle Thomas being pushed in his wheelchair by a server he had apparently enlisted for help. "Eleanor would be proud," he said. His stroke-affected voice slurring but clear enough. She stood up to Richard once too, you know. It's why he resented her so much. He pressed a business card into my hand. My attorney. Call her tomorrow. There's more you should know. Then, with surprising strength in his weakened hand, he squeezed mine. You're not alone, Rebecca. You never were. I stepped out into the cool Boston night, hailed a taxi, and directed the driver not to my home with David, but to a hotel downtown. In my purse were the key pieces of my grandmother's legacy, her journal, photographs, and the trust documents, along with evidence of both my father's and husband's betrayals. My phone began buzzing incessantly with notifications, but I silenced it without looking. Whatever chaos I had just unleashed would still be there in the morning. For now, I needed space to process what had happened and what would come next. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of David bursting through the hotel doors, scanning the street frantically. Our eyes met for a moment through the rear window, and in his expression I saw something I'd never witnessed before: fear. Not of losing me, but of losing access to what I provided: financial stability, social connections, and the respectable facade that covered his double life. For the first time since discovering the transfers, I smiled. The morning after the gala, my phone had 47 missed calls, 93 text messages, and dozens of email notifications. My sister Jennifer had called 18 times alone, her messages evolving from angry, "How could you humiliate us like this?" to concerned, "Where are you?" Everyone's worried, to surprisingly conciliatory, "We need to talk. Just us." My mother's texts were exclusively focused on damage control. "The Whitmores are asking questions. Call me immediately. With your statement for the press." My father hadn't called at all, his silence more telling than any words could be. David's messages ranged from threatening, "You've completely lost your mind. My lawyer will be contacting you," to manipulative, "Baby, we can work this out. The money was for an investment property I wanted to surprise you with," to desperate, "Please just tell me where you are. I love you." Most surprising were messages from unexpected allies, my college roommate offering her guest room for as long as you need, a former colleague praising my courage to finally stand up to those toxic people, and even a distant cousin writing, "Grandma Eleanor would be standing and cheering right now." The most impactful conversation came 3 days later, when I finally agreed to meet Jennifer at a quiet cafe in Cambridge, neutral territory far from our family's usual haunts. She arrived looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her perfect blowout replaced by a hasty ponytail, designer clothes swapped for jeans and a sweater. "You look different," I observed as she slid into the booth across from me. She gave a brittle laugh. "Well, my entire life is imploding thanks to you, so yes, I haven't had time for my usual salon appointment." But there was something besides anger in her expression, a vulnerability I'd rarely seen. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. "About Dad stealing from Grandma's estate? About my trust fund?" She stared down at her untouched coffee. "Not exactly. I knew I received more than you did, but Mom always said it was because you were more independent and didn't need the help." She hesitated. "I did wonder sometimes, especially when they paid for our house down payment but said you needed to learn financial responsibility on your own." Her eyes met mine. "After your announcement, I asked Greg to look at some of the family trust documents. He found irregularities going back decades. Dad's been moving money around since before we were born." Jennifer revealed that our father's financial manipulations extended far beyond my grandmother's estate. He had diverted funds from multiple family trusts, including Jennifer's children's education accounts, to cover investment losses and maintain the family's lavish lifestyle. The Mitchell family's wealth, it turned out, had been largely smoke and mirrors for years, impressive on paper but built on a foundation of fraud and precarious debt. "Mom's in complete denial," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "She keeps insisting Dad was protecting the family assets and that you've misunderstood everything. But Greg's seen the numbers now. It's bad, Rebecca. Really bad." When I asked about David, her expression hardened. That's another mess. He came to our house the night of the gala, completely drunk, demanding to know where you were. When Greg tried to calm him down, he started ranting about how he deserved compensation for putting up with the Mitchell family drama all these years. She hesitated. He admitted the affair with Melissa. It's been going on since before your wedding. The baby is definitely his. New discoveries continued to emerge as I worked with my grandmother's attorney, Judith Levine, a sharp-minded woman in her 70s who had been Eleanor's friend as well as her legal counsel. Together we accessed more of the records my grandmother had preserved, revealing not just financial misconduct but a pattern of controlled narratives that had shaped our family for generations. Your grandmother suspected Richard was manipulating her accounts even before her diagnosis, Judith explained, showing me correspondence from nearly 30 years earlier. She set up the hidden trust for you because she saw something in you, the same independent spirit she had. She knew Richard would try to control that, just as his father had tried to control her. The most shocking revelation came in medical records Eleanor had secured, my childhood learning assessments that my parents had claimed showed I had attention problems requiring structure had actually identified exceptional mathematical aptitude and recommended advanced educational opportunities, recommendations my parents had deliberately ignored and concealed from me. The contrast between my father, who had built his reputation on projecting integrity while systematically defrauding his own family, and my grandmother became increasingly stark. In her journal, Eleanor described her battles against the misogyny of her era, her thwarted dreams of academic achievement, and her determination that her granddaughters would have the opportunities she was denied. Richard views intelligence in women as a threat, she had written. He married Elizabeth because she was beautiful and socially adept, but primarily because she was willing to subordinate her own ambitions to his. He will try to shape his daughters the same way. Reading her words, I recognized the blueprint of my childhood, my mother's constant emphasis on appearance and social graces, my father's dismissal of my academic achievements, they're united front against any path that might lead me toward true independence. My healing journey began with practical steps, securing my financial assets, filing for divorce, documenting the fraud for potential legal action. I rented a small apartment in Cambridge and focused on rebuilding my consulting business, which had suffered during the weeks of personal turmoil. I started seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma, who helped me recognize patterns of emotional manipulation I'd normalized my entire life. What you're describing is financial abuse layered on emotional abuse, she explained during one session. Your father controlled the family through money and approval, while your mother enforced his values through social pressure and shame. Your husband replicated this pattern in your marriage, using your desire for validation against you. The clarity was both painful and liberating, naming the dynamics stripped them of their power. The rare book I had purchased for my father, the $12,000 gesture of seeking approval that had been casually dismissed, became symbolic of my recovery process. Initially, I considered selling it, thinking the money could fund a vacation or home improvements. Instead, I donated it to the Boston University Law Library's special collection, where it would be preserved and used by scholars. The donation was made in Eleanor Mitchell's name, with a small plaque acknowledging her commitment to education and truth. When the library hosted a small reception honoring the donation, I felt my grandmother's presence more strongly than ever. The book that my father had deemed not quite right was exactly right in its new home, appreciated, valued, and serving a purpose beyond ego gratification. As weeks turned into months, I began to build a chosen family around me. My therapist introduced me to a support group for adult survivors of family emotional abuse, where I met people whose stories echoed aspects of my own. My college roommate Sophia, now a professor at MIT, invited me to dinner parties where conversations revolved around ideas rather than status. Through a professional networking event, I connected with other women entrepreneurs who became both friends and business allies. Uncle Thomas, despite his health challenges, became a regular presence in my life, sharing family stories and photographs that filled in the gaps of my history. Even Jennifer and I established a new, tentative relationship based on honesty rather than competition. I was jealous of you, she confessed during one of our coffee meetings. You always had the courage to pursue what you wanted, even when they tried to stop you. I just did what was expected. The most unexpected development came from Melissa Harrington, David's pregnant girlfriend. She contacted me through my attorney, initially defensive but increasingly apologetic as our conversation progressed. He told me you were separated, she explained during our eventual face-to-face meeting at a restaurant halfway between Boston and Providence, where she lived. When I found out that wasn't true, he said your marriage was just for show. That you were cold and career-obsessed and had refused to have children. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. I believed him because I wanted to. I never questioned where the money for our apartment and baby things was coming from. She slid a check across the table for $42,000, just under half the amount David had taken. It's everything I have in savings, she said. I know. It doesn't fix anything, but I didn't know I was stealing from you. The gesture was both inadequate and deeply meaningful, an acknowledgement of harm done, a step toward restitution. I told her to keep the money for her child. We were both deceived by David, just in different ways, I said. Let's not let him make us enemies too. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when my divorce proceedings uncovered the full extent of David's financial deceptions. Beyond the transfers to Melissa, he had been systematically siphoning money from our accounts into speculative investments, most of which had failed. His veneer of financial success had been as fraudulent as my father's. He had been using my income to create the illusion of his own prosperity, dating back to before our marriage. The successful real estate developer persona was largely fabrication. His actual business consisted mainly of small-scale flips and property management for actual wealthy investors. Most shocking was the discovery that he had approached my father for a loan shortly after we started dating, positioning himself as a potential protege and ally in managing Rebecca's expectations. They had formed an unspoken alliance around containing my ambitions and independence, an arrangement that had apparently dissolved only when David's affair and impending second family threatened the carefully maintained facade. What none of them, not my father, not my mother, not David, had anticipated was the revelation that would turn their carefully constructed world upside down. While reviewing Eleanor's papers with Judith, we discovered evidence that the original Mitchell family fortune, which my father had always attributed to his grandfather's business acumen, had actually come from Eleanor's family. Her father, an immigrant mathematician who had developed early computing systems, had patented technologies that were worth millions. The marriage agreement between Eleanor and my grandfather had included specific provisions for the fortune's management, provisions that had been systematically violated for decades. This changes the entire legal landscape, Judith explained, her eyes bright with the challenge. Every trust, every account, every property transfer needs to be reassessed. The family that had made me feel unworthy of their legacy was about to discover that much of that legacy had never rightfully been theirs to control. 1 year. After that fateful gala night, I stand in my new office in downtown Boston, watching the sunset paint the Charles River in shades of gold and crimson. My forensic accounting firm has doubled in size, specializing in cases of financial abuse within families and marriages, a niche I never planned to develop but one where my personal experience has proven invaluable. The wall behind my desk displays my grandmother's framed journal pages alongside my professional certifications. On my bookshelf sits a photograph I found in Eleanor's safe deposit box, her at my age, standing proudly in front of MIT's mathematics building in 1952, before my grandfather convinced her that proper Mitchell wives didn't pursue graduate degrees. Beside it is a newer photo, me at the podium of a financial empowerment conference I helped organize for women recovering from economic abuse. These twin images, of dreams deferred and dreams realized, remind me daily of both where I came from and how far I've traveled. The legal aftermath of my family's unraveling continues to unfold in carefully negotiated settlements designed to avoid public court proceedings. My father, facing potential disbarment for his financial misconduct, agreed to a restructuring of the family trusts that restored my grandmother's original intentions. He and my mother downsized from their Wellesley mansion to a still impressive but significantly more modest condo in Back Bay. Our relationship remains distant but civil, monthly phone calls characterized by carefully neutral topics and unspoken acknowledgments. My mother, after initially doubling down on denials and accusations, eventually underwent her own reckoning when several of her charity board positions were quietly not renewed due to concerns about the family's financial practices. Jennifer and I have built something new and unexpected, not the competitive sisterhood our parents fostered, but a supportive friendship based on mutual respect for our different strengths and choices. She has returned to nursing part-time and started a support program for families navigating serious illnesses, work that genuinely fulfills her rather than just maintaining appearances. David's story took a different turn. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago, with the court ordering full financial restitution of the misappropriated funds plus penalties. His relationship with Melissa disintegrated shortly after their daughter's birth, when his pattern of manipulation and financial control began to repeat itself. Last I heard, he was working for a small real estate management company in New Hampshire. His dreams of becoming a major developer faded along with his access to my income and my family's connections. The daughter he claimed he never wanted with me but eagerly anticipated with Melissa is now the subject of a contentious custody arrangement. Sometimes I feel a twinge of sadness for the life we might have had if honesty had been its foundation, but that grief has largely been replaced by gratitude for the escape. Some marriages can be rebuilt after betrayal. Ours was revealed to have been built on betrayal from the start. Uncle Thomas passed away peacefully 3 months ago, but not before seeing the beginning of the family's transformation. At his memorial service, a small, genuine gathering rather than the society event my mother would have orchestrated in years past, I delivered a eulogy celebrating his quiet integrity and unexpected role as my ally. Thomas showed me that family is defined not by obligation or appearances, I said, but by who stands with you in your darkest moments, who celebrates your authentic self rather than trying to reshape it. His portion of the family estate, following Eleanor's long-suppressed wishes, was divided between educational trusts for Jennifer's children and a scholarship fund for women pursuing degrees in mathematics and computer science, a fitting tribute to both him and my grandmother. The $87,000 that David transferred to Melissa, the discovery that triggered my entire awakening, has been fully recovered through the divorce settlement. After much reflection, I decided to use it to establish the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Financial Literacy, providing education and resources to help people recognize and escape financial abuse. The foundation's first initiative was a series of workshops at domestic violence shelters throughout Massachusetts, teaching practical skills for financial independence. Standing before a group of women who had survived situations far more dangerous than mine, I found myself sharing not just professional expertise but personal vulnerability. Financial control is rarely just about money, I told them. It's about power, about keeping someone dependent and doubtful of their own capabilities. Recovery isn't just rebuilding your bank account, it's reclaiming your sense of agency and worth. The rare book that once symbolized my desperate bid for paternal approval now serves as the cornerstone of a special collection at Boston University, inspiring law students who might otherwise never have access to such historical texts. The gesture that my father dismissed has become something greater than I intended, not a private trophy but a public resource. Similarly, the forensic financial skills that my family minimized as boring spreadsheet work have become tools of liberation for clients navigating situations painfully similar to what I experienced. The very qualities that made me an outsider in my family of origin have become strengths in the community I've built around me: analytical thinking, attention to detail, persistence in uncovering truth. What they saw as flaws were actually gifts I needed to reclaim and repurpose. My relationship with money has been fundamentally transformed. Growing up, I absorbed contradictory messages, that wealth was the ultimate measure of success, but that women shouldn't concern themselves with financial details. That financial independence was admirable in theory but threatening in practice. Now I understand money as a tool rather than a value system, as something that should enable choices rather than restrict them. I've learned to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and financial manipulation disguised as gifts with strings attached. Most importantly, I've discovered that true security comes not from accumulation or control, but from transparency, knowledge, and healthy boundaries. These are the principles I now share with clients, friends, and the growing community of survivors who find their way to my foundation. Life isn't perfect. I still struggle with trust, especially in romantic relationships. I've dated sporadically over the past year, but find myself hypervigilant for signs of deception or control. My therapist calls this a normal adaptation to what I experienced, a protective mechanism that will gradually calibrate with time and positive experiences. Meanwhile, I'm focusing on building relationships of all kinds, friendships, mentorships, professional collaborations, based on mutual respect and honest communication. I'm learning to recognize my own value without external validation, to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, and to speak my truth without fear of rejection or abandonment. These skills, hard-won through painful experience, are perhaps the most valuable assets I now possess. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, if you felt diminished by the people who should have championed you, if you've sensed financial manipulation in your relationship but doubted your own perceptions, if you've been told that your greatest strengths are actually flaws, please know that you're not alone, and you're not crazy. The path to reclaiming your power might not look like mine. It might not involve dramatic confrontations or complete family restructuring. But it always begins with the same crucial step, trusting yourself enough to question the narratives you've been given about who you are and what you deserve. The journey from financial exploitation to empowerment is rarely straightforward. It involves practical steps like securing documents, understanding your legal rights, and building financial literacy. But it also requires emotional work, recognizing patterns of manipulation, grieving the relationships you thought you had, and building new connections based on authenticity rather than performance. Wherever you are in that journey, whether just beginning to question your situation or already rebuilding your life, I hope my story offers some validation and encouragement. You deserve relationships that honor rather than diminish you, that support rather than exploit you, that celebrate rather than suppress the unique qualities that make you who you are. If this story resonated with you, please share your own experience of redefining family or standing up for yourself in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take their first step toward freedom. Hit the like button, subscribe for more stories of healing and empowerment, and share this video with anyone who might be struggling to recognize their own worth in the face of financial or emotional manipulation. Remember, sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't fighting against others, it's finally, fully believing in yourself.